Welcome back to the show. My name is Matt Gardner. Today I have Chris MARHEFKA on the show. Chris, how are you doing today?
Matt, I'm doing awesome, man. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I always want to make sure I get the pronunciation right, and then I nailed it in the preamble. So I'm like, oh, then there's a little bit of pressure. I should have saved the one take magic for when we get going. But dude, I'm really happy to have you on the show. I've been excited to have this conversation with you. So thanks for taking the time to come on.
Yeah, absolutely, brother. I'm excited to be here.
Excellent, excellent. Right on. Yeah, lots to talk about. You got a lot going on, man. And like at time of recording, we're a few months out from your book, but at the time
hmm
that we're going to be publishing, we're like on the week, like the home stretch, to leading up to this book that you're releasing. So
Yeah.
I want to give
hmm
you a chance to talk a little bit about that because that's going to be
hmm
a big topic of what we're talking about today. So congratulations on the book and tell us a little bit
Thank you.
about it, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, man, this book has been a labor of love and has humbled me in a lot of ways. And right now, as we're recording this, I'm actually finishing up the draft. It's pretty much done, ready to go to the editors, and so um, really excited to get it out into the world. And I wrote this book. The simplest way to describe it is I wrote this book for myself 5 or 6 years ago.
Mm,
Um, and that didn't come at first. It came at first. I just was writing randomly, just the thoughts and the lessons and the learnings. And I realized the more I wrote, the more I realized I was speaking to the man that was working his life away, following the dream and the story of just work hard, work hard, work hard, work hard, to find this material success. And I realized somewhere around 30 years old that I had checked all the boxes of what I said I wanted to do in my life by the time I was 30. And yet, with all the effort that I was putting in, I felt empty inside. I felt hollow. I felt unsatisfied with my life. I felt that there had to be something more. That was the most common feeling that was running through me, is like, there's got to be something more to life than just adding another zero in the bank account or hitting this fitness goal or checking this box. Um, and for me, I set out on this journey. This didn't realize I was setting out on a journey, but this journey over 5 or 6 years where I wanted to feel more richness to life, more fulfillment. And that's actually really the main topic of the book, is finding fulfillment in your life, specifically in four key areas that I call pillars. And these four pillars are what most people have challenges with.
mm,
And oftentimes these challenges will carry through them throughout life, if they don't resolve them, if they don't address them. And the first one has to do with physical health. I spent over 2 decades in fitness and wellness, and realized that it doesn't matter how much money you have. It doesn't matter like how good things are going in your life. If you have challenges with your physical health, that will stop everything.
mm.
And so that's kind of the foundation. And I dive into it at a pretty low level. Like it's not a super science heavy book. It's just really how to identify when there's gaps, and then how to fill those gaps. The second one is around finances. It's around wealth creation. It's around your career and your purpose, and how you trade your time, your energy, for money, which is like our current barter system. And that's the other one that I find a lot of people have challenges with their life, and where for my first at least 30 years was the benchmark for success. And I didn't realize until I hit a lot of my financial goals that actually didn't that didn't get me the fulfillment that I wanted in my life. And I talk about that. I talk about the what I would say like the real challenge with money is, versus what a lot of people think the challenge of money is. And for most people, most people's challenge is they just need more. Like, I want more, I need more to do these things. And ironically, I spent my early career right out of college in finance. And I was meeting with a lot of people who are very high income earners, a lot of millionaires, a lot of people that earn 6 and 7 figures a year. And what was common was that every time their lifestyle increased, their expenses increased, and it wasn't for things that they actually cared about. That was the thing that I realized now, is that like had they looked at their finances, their money in a different way, like shifted their mindset around it, we could find happiness, we could find fulfillment, we could stop seeking more and more and more, and that would resolve a lot of the problems they have around money, just straightforward. So that's the second one. The third one is around emotions and relationships, and this is just goes off the idea that we are social and communal creatures, and no matter whether you check the boxes in all the other three or not, if we don't have fulfilling, lasting, loving, deep and connected relationships, there's a very direct correlation to like people's fulfillment of life. If they don't have, if they don't have a sense of being seen and seeing others and connecting with others, they'll constantly be seeking that. And so I talk about how to cultivate loving and fulfilling relationships, and the secret to that one is it actually starts with us. It starts internally. And then the fourth one is one that I would say was really nebulous and not even on my radar for the first 30 years of my life. And that's this idea of fun and enjoyment and play and adventure. A lot of people use different words for it, but it's this idea of loving the process of life. It's this idea that we don't have to put off what we want today, how we want to enjoy life, for some future date. Is we can actually start creating it now. And so I put it as one of my pillars, because it's actually become a priority for my life, is how do I schedule in fun? Like, how do I remind myself to love what I'm doing? Because if I'm not, like, what's the point? I got to the point where I don't want to say I wasted, but I spent a lot of time pushing through to try to get to something on the other side, and realizing that like what's on the other side is death, and we're all racing to this end point. And so I'm like, oh, just enjoy now. So those are the four pillars. And really what I love about writing this book is I created a very structured 3-stage process that people move through in each of these pillars. And in a way, I like to think that I simplified the growth process and the personal development process into these very 3 succinct stages, because each one is very different, and they require different learnings. They require a different, call it mindset, or a different way of approaching them. And if you get confused of which stage of the process you're actually in, it keeps people cycling the same problems, the same challenges, the same issues. And it's only because they don't realize the context of what they're actually facing. And so I basically guide people through this 3-phase process, through these 4 pillars, in a very systematic way. And that's what really challenged me in the book, is making it so simple that when someone reads this book, they can apply it. And that was my goal. It was like, I want to get this point across so simply and so clearly. So every time I was writing, I was like, okay, how can I make this idea even more simple, even more practical? And so that's what the book really is. It's a blueprint, it's a guide, it's a how-to manual mixed in with my story and the lessons that I learned along the way, how these came about. It's entertaining. And in doing that, I hope people can take away a more holistic approach to their life, and learning how to systematically make improvements in their life, in areas of their life that they currently feel challenged in, or stuck in, or tension in. And yeah, so it's this very it's this like really big nebulous idea of finding fulfillment, but then I compartmentalize it in these different areas, and then a very simple way to move through them. So that's
Love
the
it.
context of the book.
Yeah.
I'm really excited about it. And
it's great.
yeah.
It sounds sounds incredibly fascinating. I like how you say you have a little bit of your own story in there, and I do want to get to that. I'm very curious now. You mentioned the 4 pillars, and then you mentioned the 3 stages. By the way, the book is called Integrated Leadership. Is that correct?
Oh, great question. So, in working with the publishing team that I'm working with, we're
Yes.
actually still not finalized in the title. Obviously, by the time the podcast comes out, it'll be very well
It'll be,
finalized. But
yeah.
at this stage, we're working between a few.
Okay.
Actually, it's leaning more towards fulfillment blueprint right now. So,
Ooh.
fulfillment blueprint, or the fulfillment blueprint. So,
Yeah, I like that a lot.
yeah.
That sounds
Mhm,
cool. Well, I'm
mhm.
curious what the 3 stages are. Are we able to
Yeah,
elaborate on that? That would be
100
great. Yeah,
100%.
do
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Um, so the first stage is clarity. And in the stage of clarity, it's the process of getting more clear with your priorities in life, what's important to you. And how I break it down is this isn't a necessarily like a lifetime approach. It's just in this moment, in this season of your life, what is life asking of you to address?
Mm,
And the way I simply get to that is like, what are the problems you're having in your life? Because where you're having where you're having tension is where you are really needing to address. It's like the weight that we're dragging around every day. And so in this clarity, the clarity system, basically I guide people through to identify very clearly what is the problem, what is the actions and the experience of life. Part of the reason the integrated word was in there in the title is I integrate a lot of, call it masculine and feminine, in every one of these stages. And it's this idea that um, we have to balance the feeling side, the feeling and the flow and the experience of life with the actions and the structure and the discipline. And so I do this with all of the phases. Um, and so, how do you want to feel? And then, what's the action that needs to be created in your life or done in your life? And then, what's in the way of that? That's where I spent a lot of time over the last 4 years of my work, was helping people to identify, uncover, and rewrite their limiting stories or their limiting beliefs. And in the book, I actually referred to them as useful or not useful,
mm,
because I think there's like a weight to like these limiting beliefs. It's just like, is this serving you now? And if it's not useful for you, we just look at it in a very practical way, is like, how can we replace it with something that's more useful for today? And that's the clarity system. And what it's intended to do is to get clear about what you're doing and what you're choosing to do in every moment, every minute of your life. And so I narrow it down to a very like systematic process to come up with these like simple actions and simple things that you can do to bring this clarity into reality. Um, but the clarity process, it's a lot around self-reflection, self-awareness, a lot around feelings and emotions. It's a lot around just like bringing things to the surface and then working through them so that you can make space for the new.
mm.
And that's the clarity system. It's a lot of like unearthing. It's a lot of
Yeah.
what most people call healing work. Is really phase one work, is healing work. Phase two is the action phase. And phase two is actually a phase that I was really good at most of my life. I was terrible at phase one stuff, and I was really good at phase two. And phase two is just creating the plan, having very clear actions and very clear steps forward, and then just putting your head down and doing them. So again, I took a very structured approach to phase two, and I created a system to where people run in like 12-week cycles. So we identify a priority for the next 12 weeks, and then we create a plan around it, and actions and outcomes. And then we just put our head down and we do the simple action. And the example I wrote was actually the process of writing this book. I took myself through this exact process because I realized that if I just sat down, it started with 15 minutes, is like, okay, I want to write this book. It's very clear that this is here. It wants to come out. And I've never written before. I've never written consistently. So I said, okay, my daily action is I'm just going to sit down for 15 minutes a day and I'm going to write whatever's on my heart. And then eventually that expanded to an hour a day. And I actually talk in the book about knowing when to increase, knowing when to change the action. Like these are all simple solvable problems. And I address in phase 2 in a very like structured masculine way. Again, phase 1 is a lot more healing, a lot more feeling. Phase 2 is a lot more structure, a lot more masculine. And as people are hearing those first 2 phases, they can probably identify more with one or the other. And what I mean by that is like, there's really like, if you would say like 2 main challenges, it's not knowing what you want or working towards things that aren't really important for you that you find out later. It's like climbing a mountain and then getting to the top and realizing, that wasn't really the mountain I wanted to climb,
Right.
which is how a lot of people experience life. A lot of people work really hard at something and they realize like, oh, this isn't it. But they've invested so much in it that it's hard to walk back down and then start climbing another mountain. So I try to help people identify these signs along the way to essentially tune up where your priorities are and like correct along the way rather than having this like big awareness moment. Some people it's on their deathbed. Some people it's when they're 65 and they retire. And then for other people, it's other life events that happen along the way that have them question things. And in that questioning, they realize like, oh, I'm actually not doing what I want to be doing, what I love, what I want to spend my time on this earth doing. And so, so that's where the clarity process. The clarity process is if there's people that identify more with that one, they're the type of person, they have ideas, they know what they want to do, they're creative, they have a vision of their life, but they lack the taking the steps necessary or required to make it happen. I think of it as like this dance is like, we have to know what we want, but we also have to do our part. We have to guide it. We have to be the leader of our own lives, which is where originally the title of leadership was in there, because this book is about leading oneself. And so it's between those two, it's really a balance of both. It's like, okay, I got to have the clarity. I have to know what my priorities are so I can know what to work on. And then I actually have to work on them and I have to do the actions and I have to step every day, every moment that I realize I'm not on that path. I have to identify it, have awareness, and then just course correct. And the more you practice it, the easier that becomes. And that's where, again, I've facilitated, I've coached. Now it's getting close to around 3,000 clients. And I realize that most people are stuck in or used to one of those first 2 stages. Those are the most common that they're used to spiraling in. The third stage is where I actually think the magic really happens. It's once you are doing those repeatedly, you're getting clarity, you're taking action, positive changes, and you're happy in your life. Phase 3 is really the fulfillment stage, where you learn to enjoy this as a process, where you learn to celebrate your wins, where you learn to not take life so seriously. It's the integrated stage. Again, going back to that original title, it's when you can live your life and realize you can wake up and you can be journaling or in meditation or in reflection, just realize like, hey, I need a little bit more clarity, or I need a little bit more action. And it's kind of this, it's you've gotten to this mature place where you can seesaw between the two and really know what you need more of. It's the stage where you're living your life with small adjustments rather than massive change all the time. And that's what I call the integrated stage, or the fulfillment stage. And that one is a little bit more nebulous because it combines both. It combines the masculine and the feminine. It's like the integrated one. But it's, in my experience and where I sit now, it's what I really realized I was hoping to get to in this journey was this feeling of like, yeah, I'm working hard towards what I want and I'm loving it. Like, and I have deep joy. I mean, I'm in loving relationships. Like, I just love my life. And for me, the first 30 years were again, I was really good at the former, not so good at the latter. And so I was working really hard at things I thought I wanted, but it wasn't really clear. And I didn't actually stop to consider them until I had a really big wake up moment, actually around 30, 31 years old, when a lot came crashing down. And that was really my pivotal moment where a lot of things changed for me, that I started on this path.
That's a perfect segue. I mean, you walked me right into it. Let's get into it. Yeah, I'd love to just get a little bit more about yourself. Like if you want to unpack the
Mhm.
whole, you've mentioned the age 30 as being a real
Mhm.
big turning point for you. So
Mhm.
we can start there and work backwards, or if you want to go
Beautiful.
back further back into the story, but the floor is yours. But yeah, I'd love to hear more about your the Chris that was before the Chris I see before me today.
All right. Love it. Yeah, I would I always say 30. 30 was the year that um I saw when I was younger as like a big like benchmark. It was like a big analysis of my lifetime. And when I was setting goals, I'd been setting goals since I was maybe 20, 21. Goals in again in these four pillars of life. Um, and I always had this like 10-year outlook or 5-year outlook. And uh, I was I was always looking at it as like, by 30 I want to do this, by 30 I want to be a millionaire, by 30 I want to be married, by 30 I want this. And so a lot of my goals kind of like, I I don't know why I chose that, but I wanted to, actually I know why. I wanted to get there faster. I know a lot of people have a lifetime outlook, or like in their careers by 60 or 65 when they, again, quote unquote, retire.
Mm.
I wanted to get there faster. And so I was ready to work hard. And so 30 was my number. I realized though, I alluded to this earlier, when I was sitting down to write my goals. I used to do it every year right around my birthday, which is in December, which is perfect for the new year. So I'd like reflect on the last year, and I would think about what went well, where did I hit my goals, where didn't I? And this was really the only time where I would say I dropped into this like phase one clarity, was around this once a year time where I was in
Mm.
consideration. The trouble for me back then was it was very surface. I never went any layers deeper. And in the book, I teach about how we go layers deeper and where our real desires come from and stuff like that. But so I was setting on these surface goals, and I remember on my 30th birthday, I had checked all the boxes. I had the house. I had just gotten married a few months earlier. I had two thriving businesses, working on a third. Um, I was over a net worth millionaire by the time I was 30. That was one of my goals. I had real estate. I had a massive community of friends that I had built. I had all these clients, and I had checked a lot of the big things. And I remember sitting there, and it was like one of the first times where I was like, now what? In the past, I never really had gotten to that point, because there was always something that was clear to me, like, okay, that's the next obvious thing. But I asked this question. I was like, now what? I was like, do I just now try to get 10 million? Like now I double my revenue net? Like what? Like,
Mm.
and every time like something like I would think of something like that, I was like, no, it's not really it. It's like, what? I don't know. I guess um it, it was like this, it forced me to stop and think of like, what am I doing right now? Like, okay, like, am I saying I've made it? And if I made it, what does that mean? Like, and if I haven't made it, like, what is making it? This was the first time these questions started coming up for me in my whole
Yeah.
life. And I was like, whoa, it was this first mindset shift. It was this looking at the world in a different way. And I was like, whoa, like I actually don't know. And that was again one of the first times in my life I said I don't know. Before I was like this, I know the answers, I know the next thing, I know the next thing. And that was a big identity for me. And it's like, wow, I don't know. And then I kind of sat in that for a little bit. I think I set some more surface level goals, but I remember waking up like after that in the next weeks and the next months, and not really feeling um that lit up about them. I was just
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
no, yeah. Um, and then a few months later, This was, I want to say, it's like spring of, I don't know. I was 30 years old, and it was in the spring after my birthday. I was I was having some health issues up until that point, and I was having injury after injury. I was an athlete at the time. I was racing Ironman triathlons, and I was doing ultra endurance racing and CrossFit athlete competitions, and I was just pushing my body. And I was just, for the first time in my life, I was just like tearing things and like spraining things, and like this was happening. I actually broke my leg 6 weeks before my wedding. And I was,
Wow. Okay.
yeah, I was in a cast on my wedding. Like these were all the small signs that I wasn't really paying attention to. And the leg healed, and I got back to training, and I was in competition, and I I was doing this exercise like really hard, max effort. And then all of a sudden, like I felt a grenade go off on my head. And the intensity of it was like, it's even hard to describe, but the lights went out. I came to, I was on my back, and every heartbeat felt like a baseball bat, like getting beat in the back of my head. And I was scared. I didn't know what just happened. And I, you know, uh, I, I spent the next few months trying to figure it out. Most of the tests and the CT scans and all these tests were really inconclusive. They couldn't come up with anything. I didn't have an aneurysm, but they were like, we don't know what this is. And then finally I got a diagnosis, and didn't really help me because there's like nothing you can do for it. But what the three things that helped me actually were, well, really four, the main one, but the three treatments that I did was massage, acupuncture, and chiropractic. And I hadn't really done those before. But what I noticed was, after all three of those, I had this sense of like relief. Like most of my life was this stress driven exercise of just pushing harder. And every time I would come out of those sessions, I would feel my physical body and my mind and just my experience of life as being relaxed. And I started to realize that those were the only times I was actually like in a down regulated parasympathetic state. Like I would go to, like previous to that, I would go to bed thinking about what I need to do the next day. I would wake up and immediately be into it. And it was about pushing harder and harder and harder. And then that moment that happened, the fourth thing that wasn't a treatment, but it was really forced upon me, was for the next around 7 months, I had to just sit, because my two main distractions, called them addictions at the time, were working. I was working 80, sometimes 100-hour work weeks, just like pushing really hard. And then fitness. I was in competitive fitness, and I was always training. And so I couldn't do fitness, because if I raised my heart rate just like a few beats above resting, the headache would start to come back on.
Wow.
And I also couldn't think. My brain was cloudy. Like I couldn't really work. I couldn't look at a computer screen. I couldn't look at a phone. And so I was just like, the two things that I identified myself with, I couldn't do. And so I sat around a lot. I reflected a lot. It was really the first time where I really had to face that question that had just peeked its head above the surface a few months earlier when I was goal setting. Now I really had to face it. It's like, what are you doing? Like, what are you working all this? Like, what is all this? And I really sat with myself for those 7 months. And it was one of the darkest times in my life, because there was so much fear. It was like, what if I can't do these things again? Who am I? Like, what if I'm permanently handicapped? Like, what if I can never do anything ever again? Like, I was like, who am I? And what happened was the capillaries in my brain actually exploded from too much stress. They were just so restricted, and the muscles in my neck was compressing my vagus nerve, and so they regulate blood flow to the brain. And so someone, a medical professional, told me, it was like, your body's basically pumping a fire hose worth of blood through a garden hose, and those capillaries aren't designed for that, and they just exploded. And it was just all this stress induced, like hard driving energy, that finally my body's like, no more. And so I had a lot of fear. There are some nights I would go to bed not sure if I would wake up. I was like, I don't know if my brain's going to bleed out. Like, going to sleep with that much fear at 30 years old it changed a lot about how I saw life. And it's really when I had to call it the near death experience, but the proverbial, like, I don't know how much time I have left. Like, I started thinking about that. And around the same time, my father had a massive health scare with his heart, and it was touch and go. We weren't sure if he was going to be here another day. And so I had my own experience, and I was observing his experience and my family's experience, and it just brought me really face to face with the finite nature of our life. And I realized that, like, I wasn't enjoying this gift that I'd been given of life. And so it was in that moment where I was determined to make a change, but over the next couple of years, I didn't really know how. I worked a lot less. I took a lot less time, but I didn't really know how to do much more than that. And then that took me into a healing journey. I met some mentors that were, wow, they were successful in business. They had great family lives. They were joyful. They were happy. And I was like, what is this? I didn't have any experience of that. And so these mentors just started introducing me to new things. And I got into psychedelics and got into healing work and energy work and all these deeper modalities that I never would have touched just a few years earlier. But I had this new, completely different outlook on life. And I really wanted to discover, like, who am I without all these labels? Like, what am I doing all this for? And as I started rewriting my own unconscious, limiting, not useful beliefs that I was holding, I started to bring in some new ones. And as I brought in new ones, like, all the reasons why I was doing that old way of living didn't really apply anymore. And it opened up this tremendous amount of space for me to decide what I wanted to do next. Yeah, I sold the businesses, sold the house. I ended up taking a year-long RV trip across the country, something I dreamed of doing. And I just thought it was going to be when I retired, this like future time when things were settled and good and there was no, it's imaginary. It doesn't happen. And so unless we create it. And so I said, I'm just going to do it. And I did it. And, there was a lot of like small details that like had to figure out and didn't go well. But at the end of the day, it was like that trip opened me up to like, oh, I don't have to live the way that I have been living, and I can actually choose something different. And after that, I partnered with my business partner who was running a personal development company. We did retreats and online healing work. And I started coaching people through this work after I had a few years of experience. And it was a really fulfilling time in my life. I got to introduce a version of this to a lot of people. And then about a year ago, I decided to leave that company, and I didn't know what was next, but I had a sense that it wasn't this anymore for a long time. And the big reason why, for me, I can speak about it now, it's a lot more clear, is that it was really focused on the healing work. And I started asking the question, after facilitating hundreds and thousands of clients and doing all these retreats, I was like, what's after this? Like, what's after the healing process? Like, what do we do now? And then I started putting the pieces together of my old life and like how to do structured action and how to set goals and how to achieve them. And I had done it in all those areas of my life. And I was like, oh, like now we create this what's next plan. And then I was like, okay, what's after that? And then that's when the book started emerging. And but it wasn't until I gave myself space for all those things to come in, because that's what that's why phase one is about making space and clearing the old out, is because you actually can't add new in if there's already too much clutter in your life. I actually use that analogy in the book, is like most people's lives appear like a scene out of the show Hoarders, like the TV show Hoarders, where it's just like floor to ceiling.
Yeah.
That's how a lot of people's minds are. That's how a lot of people's days are. That's how a lot of people's like internal health is. So they're just filled to the brim with stuff. And so phase one is about clearing it out so that we can add more in phase two. And so yeah, that's like I would say that hit on a lot of the points. But,
yeah, it sure did. It sure did, man. Thanks for yeah, what a story. You know, and it's like you mentioned, it's like, yeah, you took some time to give it some space. And I think there was some co-creation with the universe forcing your hand on that, right? So, which is incredible. You know, it's like, I don't know how woo-woo you get with things, but you do? Okay, so you believe that was very much the universe. I'm sure there was many taps on the shoulder, and then this one was literally by the symptoms you had, a smack in the back of the head, wasn't it? Yeah.
100%, man. I believe that so much now. And I came up with this analogy of the feather, the brick, and the Mack truck. And basically it's how the universe sends the signals. And first they're these little feathers, and most of us don't even feel them, let alone pay attention.
Exactly.
Just brush it off.
And
then the sign becomes like getting hit in the chest with a brick. Like, wow, that really hurt. Like, that's going to leave a bruise. I should really change my path. I should do something. I should pay attention to this. But the stubborn ones like me, we don't. And we just keep forward ahead. We're walking and across the crosswalk, and then boom, get hit by the Mack truck in the metaphorical hospital where you have no choice.
Yeah. That's right.
And that's where I was, figuratively and literally. Is like, you got no choice, man. You didn't listen. And so now we turn the volume up loud enough for you to hear.
Yeah. So to the point, there's literally no other choice but to hear and sit this one out, or sit these next few months out, right? And you know, it's such a great you know, analogy or simile or comparison to recovery in a lot of ways, right? That the feather, the brick, you know, when people have a rock bottom moment, that could be like the Mack truck, right? There's a lot of people that get off the recovery elevator after they get enough bricks to the chest, you know what I mean? There's all these so great simile there as well. And in a lot of ways, you had, you know, recovery is a word that, you know, goes with so many different topics. It's not necessarily addiction recovery. There's a argument to be said that you were addicted to, you know, achievements, or addicted to something 100%. Else. So there's you know, there's still the mechanism there. So I love you sharing this with us today. And the book sounds absolutely incredible. You know, there's so many different, I love the idea of like the masculine, feminine, you know, this dance, as you mentioned, there's like this action, but there's also has to be this like mindset behind the action, instead of just doing the yang activity all the time. There's like that yin as well. So there's the yin and yang, you know, that's one of the common things that I find with people they're looking to manifest something, is like like you mentioned, I think you touched on it, was if they're too heavy on one side or the other, they're either just going to be like, okay, I'm just going to like think about it, it's going to come to me, you know, like that whole law of attraction thing, like that movie. It's just like the guy sits on his couch eating Cheetos and the Ferrari comes to him. Versus like just the action, right? So like you being able to sort of be in that flux, or that dance, if you will. I just love that. So dude, thank you so much for sharing that. I'm excited about this book. You know, and I'm, you know, just one question that came up for me too is like, I can imagine you 3 years before you got into the coaching, if you knew, like when you were in that stage of, okay, what's next? And if you saw yourself in the future, what would you have thought? Was that like pretty far out of your wheelhouse at that time? Or was coaching sort of, did you like elements of that already? Like what would that have been like for you?
Great question. So if me 5 years ago saw me today, I don't think he would have believed it. Probably would have judged it a bit. I was super judgy back then. Of myself most of all, but also of others. And you know, what I say about the coaching piece is that I had actually, I've been a coach for over 15 years. It's just the content of what I was coaching just developed and evolved and actually got deeper and deeper and deeper. Like I started with literally as a personal trainer at 21, and 22. And so like I was coaching people, and then I got into nutrition, and I got into lifestyle, and then I got into I don't know what was next. I got into performance and mindset. And then it kept like going. And then I got into like business coaching and leadership coaching. And then I realized, oh, a lot of that is like how we carry ourselves. And it was like self-development and like going into our internal world. Then that got into like limiting beliefs and stories. And that got into emotions. And then that got into, I mean, keep going, energy. And that got into like spirituality. And so the what I coached just got deeper and deeper as I had my own journey. And I was literally along the way, I just coached people a few years back from the journey that I was on.
Yeah.
Is like
Okay.
when I started personal training, I had 4 years previous to that committed myself to like being a gym guy. And like I learned how to work out. I learned science behind it. And then I got into nutrition, and like literally it almost tracks to like 3, 4, 5 years. And that's what I'm coaching, is where I was at that point. That's why I wrote the book in this way. Believe it or not, I had a big shift. After the first month of writing, I realized I was trying to write it for myself today and like my friends today and like the conversations we have.
Yeah.
And it didn't really feel grounded. It didn't feel like, and I was like, oh, like I'm literally writing it as I'm doing it. It's like, no, it's like, there's no grounded experience in that. There's not even a self-trust in that. Cause like who I am now is still unfolding, but like where I was 5 years ago, I can look back and see the lessons like very clearly.
That
and
totally
I can
makes
know,
sense.
So.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I love that about coaching too, is like generally speaking, some of the most effective coaches you can find are those folks that are just a few miles up the road from you, right? You know, and it's still fresh in their minds. They aren't so detached from like, 15 years ago I was like this, right? So that really resonates with what you're talking about. Like for myself with coaching, a lot of times what I want to use as content or what I want to share with clients is where I'm at right now, but there's still, like you say, I'm still at this like curious state of figuring it out myself, and I'm like having a hard time articulating it, and then forgetting, like you say, I love how you mentioned it, the grounding aspect is like, no, okay, this is grounded in something I did like 2 years ago, and that's what I can really speak to because I've been living it since then. So yeah, really cool stuff. Dude, I really appreciate you coming on today. I'm excited for your book to come out here. Tell us a little bit about other things you got going on. Like I know you got some coaching, you have a podcast as well, correct?
Yeah. I have a lot of things going on. I did put a pause on a few of them while I was writing the book to make that my priority. But by the time this podcast comes out, there's going to be an accompanying course and community where I support people in going through this process.
Very cool.
And again, if people are listening, like just the book alone will be a massive step. And I give prompts at every chapter of like how to bring this into your life. It's very actionable. And if they want to go a step further and get like the guided journeys and facilitation and the guided process, I'll have a course that comes out with it. And with that, I also do in-person experiences and retreats. The retreats, I realize that my bread and butter and my coaching is like teaching this work, like the content of the book and doing a course around that. But I also have this desire to introduce people to the experiences that have been really powerful for me and life-changing for me. And so a lot of my retreats are to introduce them to the experience of it. So I do a series of different retreats. And by the time this one's coming out, we'll definitely have some upcoming retreats for sure in September. Cool. And then I also run a men's leadership mastermind, which is like the high level of this work. And I run that for a 6-month time frame, and we'll be starting actually around September. So
brilliant. I love it. I can definitely see like, the previous version of you in the continuum, and how like you've moved all of that like goal setting and being specific and like the masculine energy, and how it's like found its way into what you're currently doing as well. 'Cause it seems very, very structured and at the same time very thoughtful. So Chris, if somebody wanted to reach out to you, and inquire as far as like coaching packages or just get to know you, what's the easiest way to find you online?
Yeah, the best way is chrismarhefka.com, and last name is MARHEFKA. And there's a bunch of my offerings on there. And also if they join my email list, I'm always putting stuff out about like upcoming things. That's the best way to make sure you don't miss anything, is just be on the email list. And I also share my daily journeys and lessons along the way. We didn't even touch on my podcast. My podcast is called Fully Expressed. And again, I took a break from it, but I'm gonna be re-releasing episodes now that the book is written.
Yeah.
So by September, there'll be a whole nother season that's already released. So Fully Expressed on iTunes and Spotify and all that. But and what else? Oh, and then of course Instagram.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
yeah.
Got to catch that one, right? The IG.
Catch that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
Chris Marhefka on Instagram. It's really the only social platform and I actively participate on. So
Cool.
you can check me out on there too.
Brilliant. Awesome. Chris, thank you so much. We'll have all of that information in the show notes. Really appreciate your time today. It was great to get to know you, and congratulations on the book.
Thank you so much, Matt. I've appreciated this, and man, an hour flew by very quickly.
Definitely did. Yeah. Thanks, brother.